Loaded show for you today. Find out why Notre Dame's future is stable amidst all the craziness that's going on in college football and why we shouldn't place a ceiling on what the Irish can accomplish with Sam Hartman as the starting quarterback. It's all coming up right after this.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? Welcome to another edition of Locked On Irish. Today is Thursday, August 17th, and thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018 and have been covering college football as a producer ever since. First for ESPN and now at Fox Sports. And in today's episode, Matt Fortuna is going to stop by to talk about all the seismic changes going on in college athletics right now and Notre Dame's position in the madness. Then we'll get into his expectations for the Irish in 2023 and some of the storylines we're most interested in this upcoming season. As some of you already know, Matt was a national college football writer for The Athletic and the co-host of a popular Notre Dame podcast called The Shamrock, but he has since left The Athletic to create his own college football site, which he'll tell you more about in just a minute here. Matt has been my go-to source throughout all the conference realignment stuff, plus he's still very in tune with the Notre Dame football program, so we covered a lot, and I hope you enjoy it. For the everyday listeners of the show, send in your questions today if you want to be featured on Friday's mailbag episode. As always, you can drop them in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can send them in on Twitter at LockedOnIrish or on Instagram at LockedOnIrishPod. Okay, let's talk to Matt. All right, I'm joined now by Matt Fortuna, the founder of the Inside Zone, college football's newest online community. And Matt, there's a bunch of stuff I want to get to, but first, I feel like I need to give you the floor to fill in the audience on everything you've been doing lately, because we've all missed listening to you on the Shamrock podcast, but you are working on some really cool stuff right now.
Yeah, Tyler, thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity. I feel like I just saw you at Pac-12 and Big Ten Media Days, and as recently as those events were, we'll probably never have a Pac-12 Media Day ever again, and the Big Ten, as we know it, looks a lot different right now here on August 16th as we record this. Yes, I mean, to your point, I started my own website, the Inside Zone, InsideZoneMF.com. We launched on August 1st. National college football. I'm in Chicago, so obviously there'll be a lot of Notre Dame and Big Ten, if you can still call that a Midwest conference, content on my site. But it's been a lot of fun so far. Fully independent. Free to chase any story I want. Obviously, we'll be in South Bend a lot this year. Great home schedule, and hopefully a great season for the Irish, because they've got a lot riding on this year, and they've got, I think, the quarterback to take them to good places. So that's been exciting. You can subscribe for $50 a year or $6 a month. $50 a year, I will remind you, is less than the 2 drinks my wife and I got at the Springsteen concert at Wrigley Field last week. So we're trying to make this as accessible as possible to anyone who's serious about being a college football fan. And you mentioned it. You guys may know me from the Shamrock podcast with Pete Sampson. The Shamrock, as we know it, is no longer. I'm no longer with The Athletic. However, happy to announce that Pete and I have a new show, Notre Dame focused, that will be launching next week in the lead up to the Week 0 game against Navy in Dublin. So we're very, very excited about that. I'm excited to be talking to you about hopefully a little bit of actual football, in addition to all the other craziness happening in the college landscape right now. And miss talking to you guys. It's been a long off season, a busy one, but a long one.
It has been a long off season. So we got breaking news on the podcast, so everyone be sure to check that out once that drops next week. Really excited about that personally as well. But you did kind of start your site at an interesting time, given everything that's been going on in college football. And it's weird because this is always one of my favorite times of the year. We're gearing up for another season of college football. There's optimism at every program around the country, and everyone is just so excited to be able to watch college football again. But this year, it feels a little different because we're still somewhat in the midst of yet another wave of conference realignment that's permanently altered college football as we know it. And as you've been covering these moves and talking to coaches and administrators across the country, what's been their attitude about all the seismic changes that are going on to the sport that we all love?
It's been hectic. I mean, I think, there's reality, there are financial realities about this sport, this business that make a lot of this inevitable. But I think anyone who saw it unfolding this way is kidding themselves, right? I mean, I think there is a power conglomerate. There was eventually going to be a day where there's nothing but super conferences, and there's probably still going to be a day in the not too distant future where there's the SEC, there's the Big Ten, and there's everyone else, if there is everyone else at that point. But for it to unfold the way it did, I mean, that Friday, we're talking August 4th, if I'm not mistaken. It was just absolutely insane. I don't remember a day like that in my career in college athletics where literally every 5 minutes something is changing, something's happening. I think we all went to bed that night thinking like it's now or never for the Pac-12 to save themselves. And throughout that morning, it was, hey, it looks like they're going to make it work. Hey, it looks like the Big Ten's not interested in Oregon and Washington anymore. Actually, Oregon and Washington are nowhere to be found on the Pac-12 call. It reminded me a little bit, if you're a Succession fan, of like Kendall going into the final meeting thinking the crown's going to be his, and they get to the final vote with his sister, and it's like, and all hell breaks loose from there. I felt like that was, kind of George Kliavkoff at the Pac-12 on that Friday, a very fateful day for everyone who was a member of that conference. But, I wish I could say I launched my website strategically to coincide with that. I did not. I texted an athletic director when all that was unfolding, and he said, Matt, I don't comment on these matters, but congratulations. This feels like Rolling Stone launching right before the Beatles came to America. I can't say it's been that successful, but I got a nice bump out of it. It's different though. And I don't know. I'm hesitant to say anything definitive one way or another because I'll look like a fool probably by the time this podcast airs and it's available to download. But this thing has moved so quickly, in some ways so unpredictably, that it's hard to figure out what's going to happen next. Obviously, the ACC was looking closely at Stanford and Cal. They fell one vote short. And from my understanding, there really hasn't been a whole lot of, push to get that through. That's kind of where things stand right now. And I think figuring out what Stanford and Cal, and Stanford in particular, does next will ultimately determine the next dominoes. I think any hope of the Pac-12 staying together as a Pac-12 with the current 4 schools and a few others is incumbent upon Stanford saying they're all in. And I don't know if Stanford's all in right now. I think, when you look at their Olympic sports, you look at their $1 billion endowment, they don't have a seat at the table right now, but I think they're confident that they're going to be at that table in some way, shape, or form. Cal, a little less so because they're in a bit of a financial rut here relative to Stanford. But, there's this thing called the the Learfield Directors Cup, which goes out every year to basically the athletic department that was most successful. It's existed for 29 years. Stanford has won it 26 times. The other 3 times they finished number 2. They are tied with USC for the most Olympic gold medalists, schools-wise. They're the number 3 academic school in the country, according to the latest U.S. News and World Report rankings. So, there's so much going for Stanford outside of football the last few years, but they think they're going to turn that around eventually under new coach Troy Taylor. That's just really hard to imagine a college football kind of power structure that does not include the Cardinal in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they buy their way into the Big Ten for the Olympic sports and go, independent in football. I don't know. I think that they're going to have a number of different options. I think there are a lot of smart people on that campus looking into what those potential options can be. But I think everything hinges on what happens with Stanford. And from there, we'll start to get answers elsewhere. I think Oregon State and Washington State, I think they'll be invited either to the Mountain West Conference or the American Athletic Conference. I can make compelling arguments for either one if I'm those schools. I mean, if you want playoff access and there's still going to be automatic qualifiers, look, you won't be making nearly as much money as you did before. But if you're Oregon State, Washington State, and you go to the Mountain West, you got to be thinking, hey, our path to the playoff just got a whole lot easier. Like we can make a run here. We can do some damage. And I think the American Athletic Conference is going to look at them and say, we've got an afternoon game on ABC every Saturday. You don't want to be out on CBS Sports Network playing at 10:30 in a regional conference, which in a weird way, I think is kind of limiting in this day and age, right? I mean, if you're only on the West Coast, well, you're not going to be in front of as many eyeballs. As crazy as that sounds, it's as easy as the travel will be relative to going elsewhere. So I think there are a lot of moving parts still going on. I'm as fascinated as anyone else to see what happens next and who ends up where. And then, of course, there's the ACC, which, the deadline yesterday passed as far as having to give a year's notice to leave. Florida State's doing everything they can to get out of there. I don't think they have a whole lot of options right now. And I think internally, a lot of people are probably laughing at their approach because they're all bark and no bite right now, at least as far as what we've seen when it comes to that. But as long as they're unhappy, as long as they're in the ACC, they're going to continue to bark. And that's going to fuel more speculation about what's going to happen elsewhere next.
The point you made about Stanford is really interesting because just imagine if all this stuff was going down coming off the Andrew Luck era. how different the conversation would be, really just because of what David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh had done previously. And now they're just left without a seat at the table. It's crazy how it works out and how football is the king. We already knew that, but now we're really seeing it even more so in this current wave of realignment. And you brought up Florida State, Stanford, Cal. There's a bunch of moves to be made. If you had to guess, what do you think is the next big domino to fall?
It will involve Stanford, and I'm trying to figure out what that best approach will be. I don't think it's going to be the ACC. That one did not make a whole lot of sense to me to begin with. It felt very reactive on the ACC's part, but the way it was explained to me was, look, they might not do anything for us financially, but you know, we're like everyone else. We're wondering if people are going to leave us, and if Clemson and Florida State were to leave tomorrow, which isn't going to happen, but whenever that day is, the ACC can at least say, hey, we're still 14 strong, 15 strong in all sports because we got Stanford and Cal as well. And that's where you saw the Pac-12 really air, right? I mean, they didn't do anything to react to UCLA and USC leaving. And once another team left and you were down to 9, that was all she wrote, essentially. So I think there's a strength in numbers approach, and it worked for the Big 12 too. I mean, the Big 12, even a year ago, I would argue was in worse shape than the Pac-12 was playing from a worse deck of cards. And Bob Bowlesby, their former commissioner, was smart enough to add, in light of losing Oklahoma and Texas. He got Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, and BYU, and you can argue about how valuable any of those schools are. But again, they were like-minded in the sense that they were committed to the Big 12 and keeping the Big 12 alive. And against all odds, they were able to basically present a more attractive offer to Colorado and other schools than the Pac-12 was. And that's why the Big 12 is still alive right now. The Pac-12 is on life support. So there is a strength in numbers mantra. I think everything that happens next will eventually revolve around Stanford. I don't know. It's such a unique school. I mean, like you mentioned, if this was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they were thriving on the field, right? I mean, they won 3 Pac-12 titles, I believe. They still, to this day, since 2012, lead the Pac-12 in NFL draft picks. They had 4 Heisman runner-ups, if I'm not mistaken. I know they weren't the most valuable TV property in the world, but when you've got a thriving football program, in addition to everything else you have going for you as an athletic department and university, you're not going to get left out. I think they'd probably be at the Big Ten if they were playing on the field now the way they were back then. There's the interesting part with all this for me has been the different agendas from each conference. Like Brett Yormark of the Big 12 has made no bones about, I want to dominate the world. I want to add this school and this school and this school, and we're going to thrive. Whereas like the Big Ten's publicly been very like, they think they're altruistic about it, right? Oh, we only added Oregon and Washington because like they're our friends of the Pac-12, but they need a landing spot. How nice of us.
They were throwing them a life raft.
While we picked their pockets for $30 million a year. There were presidents who wanted to add, in the Big Ten, who wanted to add Stanford and Cal for the academic component, and to essentially make it a little bit easier to have a 6-team West Coast branch, so to speak, and have travel partners and make it a little bit easier on USC, on Washington, on Oregon, UCLA to travel. Fox was not biting at that. Fox is the one who's ultimately calling the shots here. Sorry, I know you work for them as well. I don't want to get you in trouble with your employer, but Fox is the one
they're in control.
The movements here. And unless they can find an even cheaper way to get Stanford in there, and again, maybe that is a way where you don't come in for football. Maybe Stanford goes the Notre Dame route when it comes to football, right? Because again, Olympic sports, they're really, really, really good at everything. And they need a home for those sports, preferably at a major conference. I wonder if there's not something cooking behind the scenes there, but it's all going to be dependent on Stanford. And I think once they make their decision, everything else will fall into place from there.
There was a point last summer once USC and UCLA made the move to the Big Ten, and all of a sudden you're looking at Notre Dame like, could they go to the Big Ten? And if they were gonna make that move, which other school would they join with? Stanford made the most sense at the time. And now we're in a situation where Jack Swarbrick, who is still the athletic director at Notre Dame, he's been open about the fact that he's pushing for the ACC to add Cal and Stanford into the conference. And I know that's rubbed some people the wrong way because Notre Dame's not a full member as a football team, but still every other school is in there. So of course he's going to act in the best interest of Notre Dame. But this next question obviously has layers to it, considering Notre Dame's involvement with the ACC, their public flirtation with the Big Ten in the past, and their desire to remain independent in football. How would you describe Notre Dame's position in this current wave?
Stable, strong, not like the strongest. I mean, financially, they are behind the Big Ten and will be behind the SEC, but they're stable. I mean, this is when you really value that independence, because every athletic director, every athletic department in the country has some sense of anxiety and uncertainty right now about what's going to happen to their school and to their conference. And Notre Dame, for the most part, is absolved of that. Now, I don't think the ACC is in jeopardy of falling apart completely anytime soon, but that would be like the cause for concern, right? If you're Notre Dame, you need a place to put your Olympic sports. But I think when you look at the landscape right now, when you see NBC taking a bigger hand in college football and adding that Big Ten package, when you see the next athletic director at Notre Dame, it's going to be the former NBC sports president, which putting two and two together here would probably give them a pretty safe television landing spot, similar to the one they have now when that deal is up in a couple of years. I think Notre Dame's in a pretty good spot. Now, there does come a point where, you look at the money they're making from NBC now versus the money that Big Ten schools will be making, from Fox, NBC, and CBS with the next deal. And that's a real gap. It is. And you need to find a way to mitigate that gap. And it has to be through more than just, hey, we got a lot of rich alums who are happy to be independent. They're going to keep giving to us because that's important to them. It is important. And I don't want to downplay that. But, there definitely was a sense last year I got of like, yeah, independent was about playing a national schedule and being able to do things on our own term and not being regionalized or marginalized. It's just another Midwest football power. Well, the Big Ten's no longer a Midwest conference, right? Like if Notre Dame joined them tomorrow, they'd make a lot of money and they could keep pretty much the same schedule they have now for the most part, at least as far as getting to the parts of the country that they want to get to and closing their season on the West Coast every year. Again, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. It's not going to happen with Jack Swarbrick there, although, he's only there for a couple more months. I don't know enough about Pete Pavakwa, the new AD, to know, how he feels about all of this. And I think that will add one more, new element to the mix when we talk about Notre Dame's future. But I think they're comfortable with the way things are right now. I think they feel confident that, especially with NBC investing in college football the way they are now at the Big Ten, they're going to get market value from their next TV deal. And I'm sure there are other ways behind the scenes they can make this work too, as far as, hey, you may, schedule more Big Ten teams. Like you'll have more games on NBC's platform than you would before just with your home games, because we've got we've got Big Ten properties now on NBC. So I think all is quiet on the Notre Dame front right now in regards to realignment. Again, they're the prettiest girl left on the dance floor. They're the only one that will absolutely make whatever conference gets them in football a lot of money. But I don't think that's changing anytime soon.
Yeah, as a fan, I've certainly become a lot more open to the idea of Notre Dame potentially joining the Big Ten.
I feel like everyone, I feel like that sentiment has changed significantly over the last couple of years, right?
I still want Notre Dame to be independent because, there's so many traditions and things that are being removed in the sport right now with this wave of conference realignment. So I do kind of find myself sort of clinging to that. But from a scheduling standpoint, I would have way more enjoyment watching Notre Dame play a Big Ten schedule than playing some of the teams that they've been playing in the ACC every year. I just think it's a lot more compelling.
Oh, yeah.
There's more history there. They would be able to maintain their rivalry with USC, which is a big thing too. Like if that wasn't on the table, I'd have a lot different feelings about Notre Dame joining the Big Ten. But I feel like you're right. A lot of people are becoming more open to the idea yet. I think it's still going to take some time. I think the Big Ten's moves recently have turned off some people to joining because they're like, oh, I don't want to join the Big Ten. Look what they're doing. But we'll just see what happens. And maybe next week, this entire conversation will be worthless because there'll be more moves. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. I did want to ask you about that NBC deal. It seems like a matter of when, not if. Do you have any insight on when that deal might get done and sort of the framework that Notre Dame is trying to work with there?
I really don't. Nothing recently. I mean, it's they're signed, I want to say, through 2025. I don't have that right in front of me, but I think that's the year Notre Dame signed with them through. Again, hiring the NBC sports president as your athletic director, who's a Notre Dame alum, I have to imagine that's a relationship they're going to keep going strong into the next decade. My podcast colleague and former athletic colleague, Pete Sampson, had a good story about a month ago on The Athletic looking at kind of the behind the scenes of the relationship between Notre Dame and NBC and just how valuable that's been for them beyond the dollar figure. When you just look at the number of Notre Dame, alums and former football players who have gotten into the media space and how many familiar faces you see on those broadcasts now week after week. I mean, it's been a very beneficial relationship for both parties. And I don't see that, breaking off anytime soon. I just think it makes too much sense. They're going to have to obviously make more money off it than they are right now, but I have very little doubt that NBC will step up to the plate and deliver Notre Dame market value.
Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. I'll give out a pick today. I'm taking the under on the Indianapolis Colts' season win total. It's 6.5 right now on FanDuel. I think they might win 4 because, frankly, I have no faith in their quarterback situation. So there you go. Take the under on the Colts this season. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, should we talk about actual football now?
What? Yeah, right. There's a game in what? 10 days?
It took us long enough, but I'm glad we covered all of that because I knew you've been on it since really the news started to break. But let's start with Marcus Freeman. Even though Notre Dame had a pretty disappointing last season in his first year as head coach, there's still plenty of optimism in the fan base about Freeman and where he can take the program. In your mind, what does he need to do this season to prove that he's capable of taking Notre Dame to that next level?
I think, and he's given quotes similar to this in the sense of like, I can't just be again up there talking about national championships, right? We got to take care of business week to week. I think you can't lose any games you're favored in. And again, we don't know what the lines will be every single week.
Yeah, let's guess about
out,
9.
Obviously. Right.
Probably
I mean,
9.
I would think that's, standing right here, that's probably accurate. You can't have a game like you did last year against Marshall or Stanford. Like you just can't. That has to be out of your system. You were only a first-year head coach once. That's done. Like there are no more mulligans. There was a lot of hype about the recruiting trail, and I have no doubt he worked a lot harder at recruiting than the previous regime did. At the end of the day, numbers-wise, there wasn't that much of a difference to show for it. Again, does that speak to the constraints of working at a place like Notre Dame? Probably a little bit, yeah, but I also think, it's a first-year head coach learning the ins and outs of the place and learning from his mistakes. So, you can't – I mean, they're the big 3 on the schedule, right? There's Ohio State, there's USC, and there's Clemson. Those are the 3 we all have circled. Those are the 3 when you look at Notre Dame's over-under as an 8.5 or 9-win team, it's with those losses in mind. And that's assuming they win every other game. But this schedule is tough, right? Like it's not tough to like the common fan who's not a Notre Dame fan is going to say, oh, hey, why are they in a close game with Duke this week? Like it's tough. Like a perfect example of that to me is week 2, I guess week 3 for Notre Dame at NC State. I mean, you open in week 0 in Dublin against Navy. I know it's a game you're going to win, but Navy takes the life out of you. So does flying to another country and playing the next week. And again, I know you're only playing an FCS team in that home opener in the traditional week 1 spot. But that's 2 football games in 2 different countries, one of which is against a triple option team to start your season off. Then you go to NC State. I don't know if you've been to Carter Finley Stadium. That place is electric. That is an SEC type environment. NC State is kind of a hot and cold program, but they are loaded with NFL talent on that roster. And by the way, they're only playing 1 game before, and that's on Thursday. So now you're talking about 2 games under your belt in 2 different countries, one against a triple option team on the road with an early kick time against a raucous environment and a good team that has 9 days off. Like that to me, when you look at like schedule losses, like that's one where you're like, okay, like this game is really freaking hard. Again, I don't know what the point spread will be. I don't know, what the national kind of perception will be. It'll clearly be 2-0 against Notre Dame against probably 1-0 NC State.
I saw 6.5.
6.5. Okay.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's a really tough game. Like, you can't, when Marcus Freeman says we can't talk about national championships, we got to talk about, taking it game by game. This is the perfect, like, kind of, test, if you will, for that theory and how dedicated this regime is to it. Like, say what you want about Brian Kelly, who might have a national title contender on his hands at LSU this year, but this was the game Brian Kelly always found a way to win in his last 5 years at Notre Dame. Like, he might not have beaten Ohio State, who had better players than he did, but he would get an upset here or there, and he'd always take care of business. That's what I want to see from this regime in year 2. Everything was roses last year. We're able to chalk up some of those losses to, first year head coach learning on the job. There are no more mulligans this year. You can go 9-3 if you like. I say this as a neutral observer. You go 9-3 and you play really well, but lose close games against Clemson, Ohio State, and USC. To me, that's progress. You just can't lose the games. The Duke game the week after Ohio State. And I don't know how good Duke will be this year, but again, that's the where that game falls on the calendar could make it a little trickier than it should be. That's what I want to see from this team, especially when you've got a quarterback who, at least going into the season without question, should be the best one you've had since Brady Quinn.
Better than Clausen?
Yes.
Okay. I like Clausen. I see your point about 9-3.
That's fun, by the way. You're one of the, I've never heard like that so casually mentioned from Notre Dame. I feel like that's a name where if you bring it up, it's like not Weiss bad, but it's like, oh no, not Jimmy Clausen.
No, the only thing that's going to get me in trouble today is you saying Brian Kelly has a potential national championship contender. I know, because now the comments are going to be going berserk.
He could also be 0-1 very easily too. So
that is true. I do want to ask you about Sam Hartman, though, because you watched him play, you watched him have success at Wake Forest, and I think your point about going 9-3 is fair, but I feel like just with Sam Hartman on the team, Notre Dame should be able to do better than 9-3. And if they do go 9-3, I would be a little bit disappointed. So what do you think Hartman's ceiling is at Notre Dame? I don't think he's going to be Joe Burrow, but what do you think is the realistic best case scenario for Sam Hartman at Notre Dame?
Well, best case, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying, hey, 9-3, let's throw a parade. I just think that would represent progress. Playoff, right? I mean, real best case, if we're talking it, and now is that 12-0? Probably not with the schedule. It's probably 11-1, but he's a really good player. I mean, the guy's second in pretty much every ACC career passing category behind Phillip Rivers. He found himself, at least in the midseason Heisman mix, multiple years at Wake Forest. Crazy as it sounds, he had much better receivers at Wake Forest than he'll have at Notre Dame this year, although I think Notre Dame will be better in that department than they were last year. And he's got an offensive line anchored by 2 first-round tackles probably in next year's draft. So, for all the concerns about the defense, which are justified at least because there's some unknowns there, I think you've got a proven guy back there he's not 24 yet. I know he'll be 24 by the time the first snap of the Navy game starts. I don't think you should put a limit on what the best case scenario should be. I mean, he's a guy who can make plays with his arm and legs. He can throw receivers open. Like, I think, again, if we're talking about the receiver deficiency at Notre Dame, when you have a great guy back there slinging the rock, he could be the ultimate equalizer. And he's played in big games before. He's played in ACC title games. He's had some, very, very big heavyweight games against Clemson, particularly last year when I think he threw 6 touchdown passes against the Tigers.
Yeah,
I don't think you should put a ceiling on what this team can do with him as quarterback. What's realistic or not, 10-2, I think would be really good, and it's definitely realistic to make the playoff. Again, it would require a stretch. It would require at least 1, if not 2, major upsets, but I certainly think it's possible. I mean, look what this team did to Clemson last year. Now, I know the game this year is on the road, and Clemson, is going to look a little bit different than it did last year, but I don't think you go into Death Valley scared if you're a name, regardless of what your record is going into that year. I mean, they weren't scared of the Tigers last year, and that was 2-3 weeks after losing to Stanford, and Clemson hadn't lost a game to that point. So, I think internally expectations should be off the charts.
Yeah, that's how I feel. It's so funny when I look at him. I'm like, I'm 3 years older than that guy. Now, I know I have a baby face, but still, he just looks like a grown man playing college football at quarterback.
I spoke to his journalism class at Wake. I couldn't even tell you what year it was, so long ago, via Zoom. And then the professor I'm friendly with invited me back, and he bumped me one year because Sam was coming back to speak to the class. So I got basically knocked out of place by Sam Hartman. So.
Yeah. Hey, he's been around for a long time. He's been a college student for a really long time.
I mean, remember him against Notre Dame in 2018?
Yeah, when I found out that he was transferred to Notre Dame, I looked up his stats. I was like, wait, that was him? He was just getting crushed. I think he only ended up getting sacked 3 times, but he probably got hit like 10.
That game, not to go on a tangent, so I was doing actually a behind-the-scenes story with Wake Forest that day, and I was on the field that game, and it was well over 100 degrees. I mean, it was just early season game, really hot, North Carolina. That was a game, that was Book's first start that year, and Notre Dame kind of struggled until that point. So there was a sense of maybe Wake can pull an upset here. And I just remember when Sam Hartman exited that game, I'm standing whatever yard line it is, kind of parallel to him on the field, and he's down, and I just see his eyes close. And it was just like, again, he was a true freshman. It was 1,000 degrees out there. Notre Dame's defense was on the money that day. And I'm just looking at this poor 18-year-old, like, get him out. Like, that is him. Like,
get him in the locker room.
He's not tapping out. Like, he's beyond tapped out. He's done everything humanly possible to give his team a chance today offensively. And it just, like, he's just not getting protected. So kind of comes full circle in that regard.
And now this November, he's going to actually have to face that same team
Right.
at Notre Dame Stadium. Outside of Hartman and Freeman, what do you think are the most interesting storylines about this team in 2023?
I don't want to say who's the next Michael Mayer because there's not going to be a next Michael Mayer, but who becomes that kind of offensive linchpin that can bail you out when you're in trouble offensively and defensively. There's some legitimate questions about the pass rush and the defensive line because I think every great team defensively, that's where it starts with. Crazy enough, I mean, the secondary looks like it's going to be pretty darn good this year, which it's had good years in recent past, but it's never really gone into the season as anything more than a question mark. So I'm excited to see what those DBs can do. And then special teams, this gets overlooked a little bit. I know Marty Piaggi pretty well. He's had a great career so far, but like Brian Mason was freaking electric in his 1 year as special teams coordinator. Like that's one of those ones where like you may not know what you got till it's gone because they had 7 block punts or kicks last year, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, they won games, or at least were in position to win games because of how well they were in that third phase of the game. And that's something that can be the great equalizer when all else fails. So there are enough I don't want to say question marks, but things I'm very curious to see on all 3 sides of the ball going into the season. And we didn't even get into there's a new play caller, right? An offensive coordinator in Jared Parker, with Sam Hartman there. So it's pretty crazy how different the makeup of this program looks just from last year to this year on the sidelines.
Yeah, just think about what the staff and the team looked like once Freeman was hired. And part of the reason that he was hired was to for continuity purposes, so that people would stay around. And now it is a vastly different program.
You can make the argument there's more change from last year to this year than there was from 21 to 22, even though there's a new head coach.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's definitely true. And look, if you were a betting man, and I say if, knowing that you're a betting man, are you allowed to be more open about that now that you're independent?
I'm like Notre Dame. Everyone's worried about the media landscape now. I'm self-employed. I can say and do what I want, but go for it.
Okay, knowing that you're a man who isn't afraid to throw a little wager down on college football, would you take the over or under on Notre Dame's season win total, which is at 8.5 right now on FanDuel? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Because if it was 9, I would go under because I think they're going to go 9-3, and I don't think I'd lose money on that. 8.5, I'll probably still go over. Like I think 9-3 is the safe bet, knowing they went 8-4 last year and they should be better this year. Now again, the schedule's tougher, but I'm going to go with 9-3. I don't think it's going to be the 9-3 everyone thinks it'll be. I think they win one of those 3 big games, probably USC, and I think they lose one that we're probably overlooking now, whether it's an NC State, a Duke, or a Louisville.
Yeah. You think it'll be USC? I can't really explain this. Right now, I feel more confident about Ohio State, which seems crazy, than USC. I'm not saying that Notre Dame might lose to USC, but I was in the crowd last year for that game, and I watched Caleb Williams just tear that Notre Dame defense apart, and I still wake up with cold sweats.
Well, the disappointing part about that game, and I said it in real time, and it looked even better in retrospect. I mean, Notre Dame didn't even score 30 on that USC team, who gave up, I think, 40 or more to 6 or with their last 8 opponents or something absurd like that. And yeah, look, Caleb's Caleb. Like he should scare the daylights out of you, no matter who you are on defense. I just think that USC defense, they'll be better, but they'll be worse statistically, if that makes sense. I mean, they were able to mask a lot of their flaws last year by forcing a lot of turnovers. And if you're of the belief that turnovers are as much a matter of luck as anything else, I just think they regress to the mean in that regard. Plus, it's a night game. It's probably going to be cold. It's at Notre Dame. I don't know if I'm picking one of the 3. I like Notre Dame to win right now. I would go with that 1, Clemson 2, Ohio State 3. By the way, you mentioned Ohio State. Imagine being a fan of them, and you're 0-2 the last 2 years against Michigan. You got to go to Ann Arbor, and you've got road games at South Bend and Madison, and you're Ryan Day, and every Ohio State fan saying Luke Fickell or Marcus Freeman should be our next head coach.
Yeah.
Imagine the kind of pressure they're under without CJ Stroud this year.
They got Penn State at home, though, right? That's a tough schedule, man.
It's a very tough schedule. I mean, I think they'll be fine, but yeah.
Yeah, they got some dudes over there. All right, last question. Is anyone beating Georgia this season?
Not in the regular season.
Yeah, their schedule is a joke.
It's a joke. So and I will say, unlike Michigan's is a joke.
Yeah, they tried with Oklahoma.
Yeah. Georgia tried. It didn't work out. So I don't want to dock them too much in that regard. I mean, outside of that trip to Tennessee, it's really hard to to look at a loss on that schedule. Now, are they going to three-peat is the real question. Never happened since World War II. I just realized what I'm going to say. So I've got my money in Alabama win all this year. I just think this is Nick Saban's got whatever the opposite of rat poison is, that's Alabama's right now. Like they're fourth in the preseason AP poll, the lowest they've been in more than a decade. Their over-unders at 10.5. I mean, their 2 losses last year were both on the last play of the game. I know there are some legitimate question marks about, who's going to play quarterback there. Although the last time they entered a season with that kind of question hovering over them, they started Jake Coker and won it all in 2015. I just think this is teed up perfectly for Nick Saban, Alabama. Everyone's talking about Georgia. Everyone's forgotten about Alabama. Everyone thinks the dynasty's dead. Their schedule outside of that week 2 game against Texas, which they should win, is not the toughest in the world either.
Yeah, they got LSU at home.
They got LSU at home. That's LSU's only road game in the second half of the year. So if LSU can weather, I'm just poking the bear right now. If LSU can weather the first half of their schedule, they should be in pretty good shape. But I don't think Georgia three-peats. I think they probably run the regular season table because they're so much more talented than everyone they're going to play. But I think someone catches them. I mean, look, Ohio State should have beat them last year, plain and simple.
Yeah.
And that's the same Ohio State team that got routed by Michigan their last time out. So this is a beatable football team. They're probably the most talented top to bottom roster wise, and they're probably going to win all their regular season games, but I'm not going to bet on them to three-peat.
Okay. Who's going to be the quarterback at Alabama when they hoist that trophy? Milroe?
The longer it drags on, the more kind of cause for concern I have about who it might be. And I think it could be any 3 of those guys at this point. I will say Tyler Buchner. I just think the familiarity with Tommy Rees works in his favor.
You are saying that Tyler Buchner and Alabama are going to win the national championship. Now you are going to get me in trouble.
But he's got to stay healthy. I mean, I think we've all seen what he's capable of when he's healthy, and I hope for his sake he is. But, Alabama's won national titles with worse quarterbacks than Tyler Buchner. So I think, for as much as we want to write off that dynasty, I mean, 2 years ago, if Jameson Williams doesn't get hurt in the title game, they're probably the national champs, and we're not having this discussion about when will they ever win.
And Mechie too.
So,
Mechie got hurt
in the SEC title game. Either one of those guys. I mean, Bryce Young on that final drive just had no one left to throw it to and was kind of a one-man band. So I think they'll be all right. I mean, Georgia's going to be fine too. I'm not worried about them, but I do think I'm going with Alabama to win it all. I've been consistent on that most of the offseason. I don't want to deviate from it right now, especially since everyone's kind of looking at me crazy when I say it. That makes me think it reinforces my faith in Nick Saban as the greatest coach ever.
That makes sense to me. It's hard to doubt Nick Saban. I would say my only pushback would be because the uncertainty at quarterback, I can't say that they're going to win it all, although I do expect them to be right there in the mix at the end of the season. But Matt, this has been a pleasure. Is there anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
Just keep your podcast apps open. Early next week, Pete and I will be back in your earbuds, on your AirPods, on your screen. We'll be on YouTube as well. There will be a few little schematic changes to what we were doing in the past, but we're very, very excited to be working together again on Notre Dame podcast and very, very excited to get the season started next Saturday.
All right. You heard the man. Go check him out. Seriously, thanks so much for the time, Matt, and best of luck to you this season. Hopefully I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Tyler. Likewise.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Before you head out, make sure to get your mailbag questions in for tomorrow's episode in the YouTube comments or on social media. Remember, the Twitter account is @LockedOnIrish and the Instagram is @LockedOnIrishPod. You can also follow my personal Twitter account @TylerWOJCIAK. And be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. I'll see you guys tomorrow.